And now, please welcome the Honorable Deval Patrick and Jacob Miller.
Good morning. Can I get a good morning back? Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, thank you. My name is Jacob Miller. I am the Opportunity Nation Grassroots and Coalition Coordinator. I'm sitting up here today because in 2013, when I was an intern in the Massachusetts State Legislature, I was able to work with my mentor, State Senator Mark Montigny, to pass healthcare legislation in Massachusetts that would allow Massachusetts college students to stay on a more affordable healthcare plan. And I'm sitting next to Governor Deval Patrick, who actually signed the bill. So welcome, Governor Deval Patrick.
Honor. An honor. Thank you.
So, Governor,
Jacob,
you have a very inspirational story, opportunity story. What about your story and what about your life made you become civically engaged?
Wow. Well, as you know, some here may, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Anybody here from Chicago? There's some Chicagoans here. So 54th and Wabash in my case. Most of that time on welfare. I lived with my mother and sister and in our grandparents' two-bedroom tenement. My mother and sister and I shared one of those bedrooms and a set of bunk beds. So you go from the top bunk to the bottom bunk to the floor every third night on the floor. A lot of things we didn't have in those days, but one thing we did have was a strong sense of community, because that was the time when every child was under the jurisdiction of every single adult on the block, right? You messed up down the street in front of Ms. Jones, she'd go upside your head as if you were hers, and then call home, so you got it 2 times. And I think what those adults were trying to get across to us was that being a member of community is understanding you have a stake in your neighbor's dreams and struggles as well as your own. And that, to me, is the start. It's that empathy that's the start of civic engagement, that sense you have of being responsible for your neighbor just as he or she is for you.
That's great, that's great. So, as a young adult, I found myself with a critical eye on the current political situation, like many of the young adults in the room here today, but a very hopeful heart. You've quoted your grandmother, who had said to you as advice, hope for the best and work for it.
That's right.
What advice do you have for all the young adults in the room today, and how do you think they can make a difference?
Well, first of all, I think, I'd be crazy not to pass on my grandmother's advice to all of you and those you know. It's important, she would say, to hope for the best, but it's also important to do something about it, to take action. And while most of us conclude that no one person or organization can solve every problem in everybody's life, it's a time when I think no one person or organization can be a bystander. Everybody has to do something and do what they can within their own capacity, and frequently what we find is that we have more capacity than we thought we had. I mean, you, Jacob, you should tell your story, because it was your own grassroots engagement, your own decision to do something about the stake you saw in other students as well as your own experience in college that got you motivated to change our healthcare system.
Yeah.
You should talk about that.
So I'm a first-generation college student. I grew up poor, and I understood the struggles of a lot of our college students in Massachusetts. I attended Greater New Bedford Regional Vocational Technical High School, and then went on to UMass Dartmouth and just recently graduated. And while I was at UMass Dartmouth, thank you. And while I was at UMass Dartmouth, I continued an internship with State Senator Mark Montigny that I'd had since the 10th grade of high school, actually. And I had been hearing from a lot of my friends, taking constituent calls, hearing about a situation where students were being kicked off of Mass Health and being forced to take on more expensive health insurance plans. And working with the state senator, I saw a bill loosely entitled, a bill to align Massachusetts with the Affordable Care Act. We wrote, his lawyers wrote an amendment, and then the next day, we're on the floor of the Massachusetts legislature, lobbying his colleagues and lobbying others to telling stories of the college students that were kicked off of the health insurance.
You can say lobbying me too.
Yes, yeah, lobbying you too, lobbying you too. And it passed. that day, and it was passed through the legislature, and it was signed by you a few weeks later. And I was able to go across Massachusetts, tell this story, and the most impactful moment for me was when a single mother came up and said, because of you, because of this legislation, because of the leadership in the legislature and in the governor's office, I was able to stay in school, and I was able to take on a full credit load. And that was that moment that made me realize that as an individual, I can make a difference and help shape the nation we make.
Great stuff.
Thank you.
Really great stuff. Really good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. So, how would you, seeing how we're in a big room of very socially engaged people, and we want to leave here very engaged and enthused and ready to go make change in our communities, how would you pitch? You talked about it briefly, but what would be your big pitch for civic engagement and for going out into the community and pushing change?
Well, in a way, you know, it's sort of ironic you would ask me that question in a room full of people who were engaged enough to show up in the first place. In a way, you don't need that message. So maybe my message to you would be, every one of you go get somebody else, right? It's all about what we pass on. It's all about how we lift another and encourage another. That's how we heard in the previous panel. And frankly, a theme through many of the speakers this morning, this notion of building coalitions. You know, that's how I've had one elective office. I sort of cut the line and ran for governor for my first elective office. I had 2% name recognition. We built at the grassroots. We asked people to see their stake in their own civic and political future, and to make the campaign and indeed the administration not about me, but about us, all of us. And that's really about the personal responsibility each one of us takes in bringing someone else along to build the future and the nation we want. And I believe, I'll put it sort of harshly, we get the government we deserve, right? We get the government we deserve. We sit it out, and we leave it to the pundits and the pollsters and all that, and we get what we deserve. We get engaged, we decide that we're going to shape our own civic and political future, and we get better government, and we get better policy.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you for your time. And we have about a minute left, so I just want to open it up for one last question. What are you doing today to shape the nation that we make?
Gracious. Well, I'm starting a new business where we're investing in, it's called an impact investment business. We're investing in companies for their social and environmental impact. It's been I've worked in government, I've worked in philanthropy, I've worked in business over the course of a long and varied and zigzagging career. And increasingly, I've been persuaded that government and philanthropy has let business off the hook, which is to say that, when there are people in need, people struggling, communities that are environmentally unsafe and unsound and what have you, that we have turned almost entirely to government and philanthropy, who do marvelous and important work, but that business has a responsibility as well. And there's some great entrepreneurs who are in business in ways and are selling and making things about lifting communities, and we want to be their capital partner.
Awesome. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Great to be with you, Jacob.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.